So full disclosure, in my interview after my last talk, Booker said to me, "Great talk, great TED talk, not a Dharma talk." So she threw down the challenge. Here I am again, back again, making an effort to give more of a Dharma talk in the midst of my efforts to give a good overall talk. The four of us, Lee, Tracy, Cormac, and I, have made a commitment to talk about right view. The first of the Buddha's teachings about the Eightfold Path. And my talk today, Taking the Curriculum, Good Trouble, is an effort to answer that question about why would we make this commitment and what's so important about right view. So as I contemplated giving this talk, it just so happened that I remembered a talk that I attended in the early 1990s that Ram Dass gave, which was entitled Taking the Curriculum. And I had, this was before I was meditating, or at least practicing really diligent meditation. I was just kind of surfing spirituality, including contemplative prayer. And I had happened to be in one of those spiritual bookstores and looking at all these different books, and literally Ram Dass's book, Journey of Awakening, fell into my hands off the shelf. And I said, this is a sign, the earth wants you to read this. And so that's how I first learned about Ram Dass, and that's how I ended up at that talk about taking the curriculum. If you had never heard of Ram Dass before you heard that talk during the break, he was a professor at Harvard who did research on psychedelics with Timothy Leary in the 1960s. They were both kicked out of Harvard because they were giving students LSD and magic mushrooms. And so he took the opportunity to go to India. And while he was in India, he met his guru and changed his name from Richard Alpert to Ram Dass. And he returned to the United States and he brought the Dharma here, among so many other American teachers, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg. They all met up in India around the same time in the 1960s. And in the early days of IMS, I have friends who told me that they could just kind of decide, I think I want to meditate this weekend. Maybe Ram Dass will be there. So they would just get in their car, drive up to Barrie, show up on the doorstep, and be able to get a room and sign up for and get into a retreat, which of course would be very wonderful, but you can't do that these days. And so in this talk, Taking the Curriculum, and this was in like 1994 or so, he's talking about global warming. He's talking about income disparities, about racial injustice, about poverty and the wealth gap. And he said, the planet's getting hotter. It's getting hotter. All these issues are getting hotter. Ram Dass died in December of 2019 as the pandemic was just beginning to emerge. He got to witness the death of Trayvon Martin and many others. And he got to see this planet really heat up. I haven't found his last talk yet, but I imagine it probably had to do with how hot things have gotten, how much unease there is in the world. So what's the curriculum? In his books and Dharma talks, he describes a process of learning about how the mind works, of meditating and being present to what is unfolding in this moment, in time, living on this planet. And as you heard, he can tell some really great stories. You know, the story that he tells about the woman who he met, and she said, you know, I really could do some heavy work if I didn't have kids. And he's like, really? You know, like, the kids are your heavy work, lady. That's the call of the Dharma for you, is everything you do and every moment you are with your children. And that's one of the core pieces of his teaching, the curriculum, is wherever you are, in whatever is going down in your life, there is no, you know, if I could only be at IMS, show up on the doorstep of IMS and just sit for a week, and that would be my ultimate practice. Ram Dass's teaching, the curriculum is your life is your practice. Wherever you are, whatever discomfort, whatever pain in the body, whatever person is in your face, that's your practice. This week, on Thursday, I found out that the 27th person who I've known, 27th person died during the pandemic who I've known. And he was a gentleman, he was my patient. I'd been seeing him every 3 months for the last 2 years. And every 3 months, I'd say to him, your blood counts are getting worse. I think you have cancer. We need to do something about it. We need to work it up. We need to do some tests. You need to get these things. That's how we're going to find out what's going on with you. Because we can give you blood transfusions and we can give you all kinds of medicines. But if we don't know what we're dealing with, we can only get but so far. And each appointment he'd say, no, I don't think so. I'm gonna just do my own thing. If I need a blood transfusion, I'll take it. But you're not gonna see me again for another 3 months. I'm not gonna come in just so we can have this conversation again. And I'd say, well, please talk to your family. Please tell your daughter that these are your thoughts. Please start making plans for your wife, since you're her primary caregiver, so that when you're gone, there's somebody who can take care of her. Because I know your being her primary caregiver is an important part of your life. And so in May, he was in the hospital, and a group of the doctors I work with stood over him very sternly and severely and said, you need to have these tests done. You know, and they're a group of men. So what do people do when a group of men wag their finger in your face and look very stern? a lot of times you follow what they do. And he did. He let them do the test. And it showed that he had a blood cancer. And they said, we want you to come into our clinic. We want to start you on chemotherapy. And he said, okay. And they had a family meeting. And his daughter got to find out what was going on with him and the severity of his disease. And when I looked at his chart, he never went back. And one of our aides called his house, because these days we call everybody up 2 days before they come in and we do a screen. Have you been exposed to anybody with COVID? Have you had any of these symptoms? Fever, chills, lost your appetite, lost your sense of smell? And his wife said that he passed away. And so I go into his chart to see why he didn't show up. And that's when I find out that he passed away. And I felt devastated. I felt brokenhearted. I felt like I failed. And as I was sitting in my chair, feeling this, I said, this feels out of proportion. I'm feeling more intense than I usually feel about somebody who I wasn't very close to. So what is this about? So here's that first piece arising, the first piece of awareness. Something's up. This is that. And then the other piece is the bedrock of the Buddhist teaching. This is a moment of suffering. And so I gave myself this moment to inquire. I got up out of my chair. I took a walk. I went outside. I took my mask off because I felt smothered. I stopped and I stood. One of the three postures is standing, lying, and sitting. So I had been sitting and I had that first awareness. This is a moment of suffering. And I stood. I took 3 deep breaths in and out. And I put a hand on my chest and I said, sweetheart, what is going on? Who is this really about? Because this isn't about Mr. So-and-so. This is about something in your life that was personal. So here I'm trying to encounter and engage right view. Tell me what's going on, sweetheart. What is it you're feeling? And the little kid inside me said, it's all about mommy. It's all about mommy. It's all about how mommy died. My mom died when I was 17 years old. She died from breast cancer. She left our house one day and said, I'll be back in a week or so. I'm just going to go into the hospital because I don't feel so hot. And after a few days, I called her and I said, Mommy, I'll come visit you after I get out of class. I'll get on the subway and I'll go down to Lenox Hill Hospital and I'll come visit you and spend the afternoon with you. And she said, no, stay home, take care of your brother and sister, go to Radcliffe. And I said, okay, 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 okay. I won't come visit you. And she died 4 days later. And I didn't know that she was going to die. And that's one of the stories, that's one of my bedrock stories in my life that arise over and over again, like that movie Groundhog Day, you know, in which the alarm clock goes off and he's like, I'm not going to live that same day over again, am I? And yes, Bill Murray lives the same day over again. And that's because that is, for me, a deep well of unintended suffering that whenever things like this situation with this patient arise, I'm right back in the movie, in that scene with my mom all over again. But the ability to have right view brings me back to the present moment, to the recognition of my own suffering, to the recognition that this is a moment in which I need to provide myself some care and attention. And so being outside and having the sun on my face and the humidity on my body, the breath, my attention to the breath, my hand on my chest, my offering myself loving kindness and care, I return to that moment in time. So I just made an executive decision that we're not going to break up into groups today. And I'm going to give you all the rest of my talk. Because believe it or not, that story about the patient was a divergence that was not originally going to be in my talk, but as things happen, as I tend to do, I tend to go off and all of a sudden into some tangent in the middle of my talk. That was not exactly what I wrote down for my talk to be today. And because I was feeling it, and that's the direction I went. But I want to make sure that I gave you the Ram Dass half of my talk, taking the curriculum. So I'm going to give you the second half of my talk, which is good trouble. So last Thursday when I woke up and I did what lots of us do these days. I went into whatever social media platform I wanted to be on. I logged in and I saw that John Lewis had died. John Lewis was a congressman from Atlanta, Georgia, who was currently in Congress. And he was 80 years old, and he was diagnosed coincidentally in December with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And another piece of full disclosure, my father died from pancreatic cancer. So it's another one of those things where I'm always sorting out what is my grief about this really touching. Is it grief about John Lewis's death, or is it grief about my dad's death from pancreatic cancer? So John Lewis, when he was a teenager, he wrote a letter. He heard Martin Luther King on the radio, and he wrote a letter to King, and he said, "This is really moving, and I want to join you." And he didn't tell his mom that he wrote the letter. And when he turned 18, Martin Luther King invited him to come and meet him in Atlanta and sent him a bus ticket. And so John Lewis traveled from the rural town in Georgia that he grew up in, Troy, Georgia, to Atlanta to meet Martin Luther King. And he felt very moved. John Lewis wanted to challenge the local college, Troy College, because they weren't admitting any Black students. And his mom was like, "No, don't do that. No, just don't make any trouble. Don't get out of the way, don't cause any rifts. I like you alive." And so he went to seminary in Nashville, Tennessee, because he listened to his parents and his elders who said, "Don't get in the way, don't make any trouble." Unfortunately, he met up with a whole bunch of college students who were demonstrating, sitting in at lunch counters, Black and white college students who were members of this nonviolent movement, who said, "It is time for integration. Come on, all this whites only, colored here stuff needs to end." And so he went to a sit-in in a Woolworths, and he was arrested. That was the first time out of the 45 times that he was arrested. And as the police led him out of the Woolworths to take him to jail, what he said was, "I never felt more liberated or more free in my whole life than I felt at that moment." And so here is the rising, this piece of right view, because what right view gives us is totally being present, totally in the moment, feeling in the body, and knowing unequivocally that what I'm doing is the right thing that I'm doing, and where I am in this moment is exactly where I need to be. And so being on this path, being aware of whatever right view is not for the faint-hearted. In addition to being arrested 45 times, John Lewis was beaten, and he had a concussion, and he was hospitalized after marching on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and being attacked by Alabama state troopers in March of 1965. As a result of that beating and that concussion, And that being on television because the media was there, President Johnson was forced to act, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed through Congress and signed. And so this is a speech that John Lewis made at the March on Washington in August of 1963. To those who have said, "Be patient and wait," we have long said that we cannot be patient. We do not want our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now. We are tired. We are tired of being beaten by policemen. We are tired of seeing our people locked up in jail over and over again. And that was August 1963. And that speech is no less relevant on July 25th of 2020. On June 27th of 2018, he tweeted, "Do not get lost in a sea of despairs. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It's the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in trouble, necessary trouble." Two weeks ago, I joined White Coats for Black Lives. And as I've seen the moms in Portland, Oregon, standing in front of their children so that the federal troops won't beat them, I've come to realize that I'm going to heed John Lewis's words and get in good trouble. Just like the moms, I'm going to put on my white coat, my stethoscope, and my mask, and I'm going to stand in front of protesters and hope that I can keep them from being beaten because I'm wearing my white coat. And I'm clearly a clinician. And that's because I feel called. That was what I woke up and I knew Saturday morning when I heard that John Lewis had died. It was very clear to me, and it was unequivocal. You're called. It's time. Step up. Get in the way. Get in good trouble.